Hey, welcome to 9394, a music podcast with me, Travis. Welcome. It's been all the way since episode 28, when my friend Pearl Joslin did the album No Need to Argue from 1994, that we last visited the Cranberries. We're doing them out of order, but I knew we'd get to the first album eventually, and my new friend Kate RB has joined us today to talk about it. Here's our conversation. Check it out. I can hear you fine. Hello.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. I feel like I've been listening to so many episodes. Like your voice is very familiar to me already.
That's good. That's good. Feel comfortable, hopefully, already. Have you done much podcasting before?
This is the very, very, very first time.
I am honored. Thank you.
Yep. But I listened to, I'm really good friends with Candace Morissette. Mm-hmm. And I listened to her episode while we were together, and I was like, I gotta do one. So that was the impetus.
Great. And you've chosen a pretty important album from the era. Which album did you choose?
Yeah, the Cranberries, everybody else is doing it, so why can't we? It is a classic, I think, in many people's minds, but it's one that has just meant a whole lot to me a couple of times in my life, actually, which is one of the reasons that it immediately jumped into my mind, like, this is the album I gotta do.
Great.
You know, I was a bit young when it came out. I was born in 82, so I was like 11 when the album first came out, and didn't really discover it until, and this is going to date me, or maybe not, for people who like this podcast, there was a CD, like a really cool CD-ROM computer thing for Windows 95 that the Cranberries put out called Doors and Windows.
Oh, I didn't hear about that.
I got it as a Christmas present one year. And I knew who they were. I'd heard Zombie, like, I was like, all right. But that showcased some of their earlier music. It was like sort of like an interactive program, very cool at the time.
Okay.
Hadn't really seen much of anything like it. And that's what sort of made me take a step back and go listen to the full albums and really take it in. And I was like, how did I miss this, you know?
Well, being 11, I guess. But also, as far as dating yourself goes, pretty sure most of my audience is about our age, so I think we're cool.
As I was saying that, I was like, probably everybody's like, oh yeah, I remember that. So it's perfect.
Yeah, let's get into it a little deeper. So we already covered how we know each other, which is that we don't. But we've met each other now, and we know each other now through Candace, because I always start my show with that. And as far as the album goes, you've got an interesting way of getting into that album with a very era-specific CD-ROM game.
Yeah, it was. I remember that was back in the day when, what was it, the Encarta encyclopedias and like everything, yeah. Like, oh, you could put in a CD-ROM into the computer and all this magical stuff would happen
on your computer.
So, you know, it was definitely of that era where all of that seemed really cool and kind of groundbreaking.
That's awesome.
When I got the CD, I was probably like 15. No, okay. 13. And I think it was that time in life when, like, your family doesn't know what to buy you because they don't know what you're into anymore. You're, like, suddenly not a kid and you're also not a grown-up. Because I remember when I got it, I was like, okay, I kind of know who this band is.
Yeah.
And then it just ended up being this sort of, like, gateway into discovering this music that sort of had a big impact on my life. So...
Yeah, they threw a dart at the wall and hit a bullseye. So that's great.
I don't remember who gave it to me, but thank you, wherever you are, because it was a big deal.
I definitely remember this album coming out. I remember Linger, of course, was like the really big single from this album. But Dreams was the first single from this album, and it was pretty heavily in rotation on MTV. especially like the late night stuff, like 120 Minutes and Alternative Nation. So at this time in my life, Columbia House existed, and I would often, I mean, I did it like 3 or 4 times where I just, and you get like 13 albums every time. So
same.
I was like, okay, Cranberries. So I picked up this cassette through that. And I'll be honest with you, I did spend some time with it back in the day, but it wasn't one that I spent a lot of time with throughout the rest of my life. As I talked about when I did No Need to Argue with my friend Pearl, I just kind of set them down for a long time. I always appreciated them, but I think that Zombie and Linger were just like such huge radio hits that it kind of overwhelmed me because I was still listening to radio and stuff back then. So it was like I kind of got my fill.
It was too much. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of got my fill for a long time. But when I started listening to No Need to Argue, I was like, oh shit, this is, because I hadn't spent any time with that album, really. I was like, that was really good. So I was happy to go back and listen to this album and spend time with it because it had been, 28 years or something since I'd really listened to it.
Yeah, and they're one of those bands, I think, where like only certain moments on their albums really translate well to like radio hits.
Mm-hmm.
It's best listened to, and I feel this way about No Need to Argue too, like as a complete package.
Yeah, most albums are.
Because there's like some nice segues between songs, and like one thing I really liked about this album, and that I came back to it after a really bad breakup, actually, when I was like 19. And that was when I really realized, I think when I was younger, I was like, oh, this is beautiful. And her voice is unlike anything or anyone that has ever lived. I think it's very unique and very beautiful. But after that breakup and listening to this album again and really paying attention, I was like, this is a breakup album, or it's like a relationship album.
Mm-hmm.
She talks about the excitement of like new relationships and the unknown, and then a couple of high moments. It seemed like it was mostly a pretty dysfunctional relationship that she was writing about, but the album sort of ends on like an angry note or like a regretful note.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I really took that time to listen to it again after that bad heartbreak, I was like, oh, I connect with this now on like a whole different level than I ever could have when I was 13.
So you've been able to kind of return to it at different ages of your life and have it mean different things to you, which says a lot about the staying power of an album like that.
Yes, yep. And find something new in it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Because I felt very similarly to you. Like, I could probably never hear Zombie again for the rest of my life and be just fine.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that certain songs of theirs had, like, that radio power, and then so much else was missed. Like, unless you bothered to go pick up the album and take a listen. Because it's just sort of quiet and ethereal and, not necessarily a translation to 90s alt-rock radio back in the day with all the grunge and heavy guitars and things like that.
Yeah, it's funny. Back in the day, I kind of had this feeling that, because I was 13 and I was very keyed up about like, what is alternative? What is indie? And that kind of stuff. And I remember feeling like these guys were kind of like a pop band that somehow just kind of got accepted as alternative. But the more I've listened to them over the past year or so, I've come to realize that they're like a space pop band. They're like dream pop. They're very much like borrowing from 80s, mostly UK influences.
Yeah.
And kind of translated it into like a 90s style that really, really worked well, that a lot of bands had kind of stopped doing by that point, let alone found huge success. But I think it's partly because, like you say, a lot of people didn't dig too deeply into the non-singles. And some of the singles, that kind of ethereal nature that you're talking about to their songwriting, didn't necessarily translate into all of their songs. Some of them, especially on this album, Dreams and Linger, you can feel it much more on those 2 songs. But yeah. So what is your favorite song on this album?
Oh, I agonized over this. I'm not going to lie. I had to go, like, I've listened to it multiple times again, kind of like preparing for today just to get my head straight about it. And I have to go with the opening track. I still do.
Yeah? It's really good.
I can't see the
it sort of like welcomes you in to the album, to like the mood of what you're about to listen to. And I love the way that it showcases, you know, her voice and the ability to sort of carry that vulnerability and emotional authenticity that she does, kind of unlike anyone else. But also, you know, it sort of goes from a slow tempo to like a more up-tempo song at points. And you can hear some of the musicianship of the guys in the band as well. It's just a really nice like showcase.
Yeah.
And I love lyrically the whole discussion about, you know, it's sort of like jumping into a relationship with someone new, or maybe you're at the point where you're starting to assess, like, is this right for me? Is this going to work? Do I love them, but actually they're not right for me and this is a bad idea? And she like juggles that uncertainty, I think, throughout the lyrics in a way that the whole thing just comes together, I think, to be one of their most beautiful songs.
It's a really masterful opening to an album, especially. I agree. The way that it builds, it's subtle. It kind of hooks you in and just kind of grows as it goes. Because it almost feels like it's going to be like a minute-long kind of intro song that then get into like the real album or something. But then it gets to be, yeah, I agree, one of the more standout songs on the album.
Yeah, I thought as I was looking at this again, the way that they sort of like structured the songs, like how that song leads into Dreams, which is like this big epic, you know?
Yeah.
I thought they did a really nice job overall of like keeping a mood and a tempo across all the tracks. Like the dips into the quieter songs sort of felt pretty natural. I guess the feelings that come up for me a lot were like just the yearning and the uncertainty with like a new romance. And then by the end of the album, you're like, okay, now she's angry, vengeful, you know, like trying to understand, confused. It just does this really nice arc that I connected with a lot.
That takes a lot of decision making, like a lot of intention, right? In terms of songwriting, in terms of structuring the album and production, because this is an incredibly even album. Like the way it all connects. And if I had a complaint about the album, I think that some of the song titles are a little forgettable. You know what I mean? They're just kind of like these like common phrases or like single, like the word how, you know what I mean? Like it's often like they kind of get mixed together, but in a way that kind of works for what's going on, because like you said, it's a really comprehensive album. Like it's really all together, and it kind of should be taken that way. And so for it to all kind of blend together, and I don't mean that like it's muddy, I mean that like it feels like one complete thing.
Yes. And for a debut album, you know, it's crazy to me. I mean, part of why I love them too is I just find Dolores' story to be so kind of interesting that, you know, I have this image of her when I was reading about like how the band came together, that the guys already had a band. They had a different name. It was a play on words of Cranberry. I think I don't remember exactly what it was, but they had put out like looking for a lead singer. And there was one article I read where they were talking about how Dolores was just like this little tiny thing with a little pixie cut and rode her bike to the audition. She was 18 with a keyboard under her arm and walked in, and the guys were like talking about like, oh, you know, we weren't sure what this was going to be, you know, and they're like, and then she opened her mouth and started singing, and it was like being transported to another realm or something. I've always found like stories or just people who are not what you expect them to be. Like they defy your expectations. I find those stories really interesting, and I think that that's kind of her story, you know, like the guts that it took to roll up on your bike at 18 and just like with that confidence to know that she could do it. And then they became a songwriting duo in a way. Her and one of the guys in the band wrote a lot of the songs together, where she would do the lyrics and he would do sort of the melodies and things like that. And so it feels like this beautiful synergy between like these two really talented people that kind of brought this magic forward. But to think that, you know, she's 18, 19 when they recorded this, I'm like, that's crazy, you know? The depth and the talent there is just kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah. For me, I picked for my favorite song on this album, Not Sorry. you would never guess this is coming out of like someone that young. Right. It feels like there's a great sense of like growth, like personal growth, and just like unapologetic, well, literally unapologetic,
right.
but progress. Right. And I guess, that certainly can and does happen with people of her age. But yeah, there's this confidence to that song, and there's this confidence to this whole album, what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I know full well it's a debut album. Like, I was there when it came out. But even when you said debut just now, I was like, oh, right. Yeah, this was it. This was like the beginning. It's wild that they had such strength and confidence from such an early point. And I guess you're right. Probably a lot of that has to do with you've got a really, really talented lyricist and singer.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that's where the magic happens, is like when a band or a musician is at their most like raw, pure, undistilled, sometimes is in these debuts where it's like, they are who they are, and maybe over time with, what is selling or the record company or whatever, things may change. But sometimes there's just like a purity to the start of something.
Yeah, and there's definitely a purity here. I don't know that there's a rawness, though, because it's so polished, and in not an overly polished way.
Mm-hmm.
The production value of this works so well with their songwriting style and like their tone and all that kind of stuff. That in part also, I think, gives it this real professional feel that you just would have to know it was their debut album. Otherwise, you probably would think that they had some other stuff out.
Yeah, exactly.
You've listened consistently throughout your life, so you're probably pretty upset when you heard that Dolores Reardon was lost.
Yes, and the way in which that happened was so tragic and so sad. That's actually, I was like, I connected with this album back with that CD-ROM, and then after my bad breakup. And then it was interesting because I hadn't listened to it again for a while. It was 2020, and my dad passed, and I hadn't seen him for 8 or 9 months in the thick of COVID. And his death was really sudden. And I started, for whatever reason, I was just like trying to emotionally process everything that was happening and listening to this. And at that point, I didn't know all the circumstances around Dolores's passing, and reading about it, and just like it put sort of like a different, I guess, like mood or thought in my mind as I was listening to it. Like, this was her beginning, like this was their first album, and to think where things ended up. It's sort of like it connected with me in that time where I was grieving in a different way. That, even though the songs are about love and breakups and all of that, it was just like, there's such an emotional power to her voice. That I find that like it's cathartic. It matches my mood and my feelings when I'm feeling down or in turmoil about something. And so I started heavily listening to it again. It was like September or October of 2020 after my dad died. Just, I don't know, something resonated. And hearing, the tragic way that she ended, it's made me listen differently, I think. Knowing her whole arc,
Yeah, because it's all tinged with this, like, it's bittersweet, right?
Yeah.
The knowledge of that this is all we're going to get from this artist, and that as much as they were celebrated in the early mid-90s, they did not, at least in the U.S., I know that elsewhere they were much more recognized, but in the U.S., I feel like they should have, and I'm partly to blame for this as, as a drop in the ocean of fans, they didn't seem to get the continued attention and respect that I think that they deserve. But there was clearly people like you, and I've spoken to quite a few that were like holding the fire.
Oh, yeah. One of my biggest regrets is that I never did get to see them perform live.
That sucks.
I know. I'm like, it's like a mission of mine now when I hear that somebody's touring, and I'm like, so many times I've said, well, maybe next time. It's like, no, go, do it. You never know what's going to happen. I've seen live recordings of some of their shows and things, and it's like, she's one of those truly amazing vocalists where she sounds just as good belting it out on stage into a microphone as she does on a recording. I mean, that blows my mind.
Yeah, there's no correction going on. There's no...
Yes,
like,
yeah.
This is well before auto-tune, but still, like, they had ways to tweak and stuff, and there's none of that.
Just, like, the completely, like, innate talent is just something that, you know, in a sense made it even more sad to me that she died at, like, 46 years old, and what else would she have created or done or, you know, moved forward with. So... yeah, it definitely colored things a little differently after I heard that story. And it was funny that I learned it right at the same time I was dealing with my dad, because it sort of felt like this full circle kind of connection moment for me in a way that I think has made me think about and listen to this album more ever since that time.
Yeah, it's even more personal for you now.
Yeah, exactly.
Which sounds like it already was. But so as much as you love this album and as personal as it is for you, are you able to pinpoint a song on here that maybe isn't the strongest compared to the rest?
Yes, I've had to listen multiple times again to make this decision because I like it so much as a package. But I was thinking about the song Pretty.
That was the one I chose as well.
Which is not a bad song. No. And as I was listening to it, I was like, this is difficult because in some ways it's Dolores' voice at its most distilled because the instrumentation is really quiet or not even present. It's her singing. But what I think that song maybe was misplaced is like when I'm listening through the album in order, it's sandwiched in between two sort of more upbeat, up-tempo tracks that sort of would segue together better. Yeah, that
makes sense.
And so the reason I chose it as least favorite is just because I would find myself skipping it.
You're in the mood that Sunday gives you and you're ready for where Waltzing Back is going to take you, right?
Exactly. And so it felt like, okay, hurry up, you know, let's get to the next one. So a different placement might have done that song more justice, I think.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I chose that as mine as well, but I really couldn't pinpoint what it was that made it not my favorite on the album. Because like you say, it's certainly not a bad song, but maybe that's it. Maybe the fact that, like, it's kind of a mood shift in an album that otherwise moves pretty smoothly from song to song. I think that is something about it. Okay.
Yeah.
I feel better, because I kind of feel like bad sometimes when I choose a least favorite song on an album that I haven't spent. I mean, I spent a lot of time with it back in the day, so I felt like entitled enough to do that, but I feel validated that you chose the same one.
I know, I have a hard time too, because I'm like, I always want to see the good, especially in something I love. It's like, there's so much here, but it's like, okay, well, compared to the others, you know.
Well, that's the sadist in me too, is that I kind of want to like, oh, you love this thing? Tell me what you don't love about it.
It's good. It's like, don't just praise it all. There's got to be room for improvement somewhere, right?
Nothing is perfect. Very few things are perfect. I mean, there has been some guests that will come on and be like, there's nothing wrong. And I'm like, okay.
Oh boy, that's a bold statement too.
It takes a lot of love for an album. Like I say every time I do this segment, albums I love most, I usually can admit there's at least one song on there that's like, if this was cut, the album would still be good and maybe even improved.
Exactly.
Now, shifting back into appreciation, what about a song that is underrated in terms of maybe fans have it properly rated or maybe you didn't rate it properly in your mind?
Yeah. This one might have been the hardest of your questions because I was like, I feel like everyone knows Dreams, everyone knows Linger. So almost any other song would be a candidate for underrated because unless you really sat down with the album, you probably didn't ever hear it.
Yeah.
But I ended up going with the one that hooks me, I guess, that like I come back to, and that is Sunday. like that it's sort of like this commentary, or lyrically she's talking about like that sort of excitement, confusion of like early love or an attraction. And it also does a really nice job of showcasing, I think, her voice and the sort of like more up-tempo potential of the band, since a lot of their songs are a little bit on the quieter side. And the melody is just one that I would find myself humming and would make me want to come back to the album and almost like start on that track. Like, that's the song I want to hear.
It easily could have been the third really huge single, right?
Yes. Yep.
Out of all the songs on this album, that song seems to me like the most one set up to have been widely received well.
Yeah, and it's just beautiful. I like the way that the music, it's sort of like a dancing around melody with the beat, the way that it is. And I feel like it mirrors almost like at an emotional level the lyrics where she's talking about like, you're spinning me around and my feet are off the ground. The music makes you feel like it's almost dizzying, you know, like it's just a song that fits really well together, I think, as a package.
It does. It works really well. And it works well with the song that I chose as my underrated, which you already referenced, which is Waltzing Back. That's obviously the 3/4 because it's a waltz. It's a bright point in the album, these two songs. Not that it's a glum or bummer album necessarily, but those are like the falling in love kind of parts of the album, like you were talking about earlier, right? With all of the insecurities and concerns that come with that. They're there, they're present, but there's still like that elation and positivity and kind of like hopefulness that's going on.
Yeah, and Waltzing Back, I remember when I was listening to the album, I was like, I don't know if I'd call what she does at points like yodeling, like warbling, but she does it so beautifully. And in Waltzing Back, that is really highlighted, like in the chorus, and it's beautiful. That's why I was like, I don't know how to choose. This is a really difficult exercise to kind of think about favorites and underrated, because I feel like, I don't know, just the nature of things. I think, and maybe this is wrong, this is like my perspective, but it's like back in the day, you're talking about Columbia House, like you had alternative rock radio or like MTV where you could hear music. And then if you wanted to dive beneath the singles, you really had to buy the album. Yeah. Like, there was no Spotify, there was no way to just go and check something out, which I think is where the pull for so many of us came. We were like, 30 CDs for a cent? Like, how many of us never paid Columbia House back? I mean, everyone.
I never paid them at all. Never fulfilled any of my obligations.
No, but it was like, that was kind of the only way, unless you were spoiled and had parents that would buy you CDs all the time, like, or had a job, or
shoplifted, as I did from time to time.
We found ways, legal and illegal.
There were ways.
But yeah, so I think that's maybe part of, you really had to invest in an album at that time. Yeah. To really understand and get the full picture. Otherwise, it was like, here comes the next thing on rock radio, and we've all moved on.
And given the ubiquity of songs like Linger and Zombie and stuff like that you could be a surface kind of fan and feel like you liked it okay. And it's funny, your friend Candace that was on recently, we did Sarah McLachlan's Fumbling Towards Ecstasy. I feel like I really did the same thing, even worse with that album. It's just like where you get so inundated with certain songs, you're like, yeah, I like this artist.
Right.
I don't need to dig any deeper because I know them. I know what they've done.
Right.
But you have really no idea. But fortunately for me, I guess, I really stopped listening to the radio in the 2000s, early 2000s. So,
yeah, I think that many of us did.
Yeah, so I only did that with like a few acts, and now I've created this podcast, which gives me the opportunity to go back and explore stuff.
Yeah, that's one thing I've enjoyed about listening to other episodes is like I feel like I was a surface level fan of a lot of bands from this time, and I attribute it a lot to like bandwidth, money for CDs, like everything that I referenced.
Sure.
And so it's caused me a few times to go back and like revisit an album.
Good.
Just hearing someone talk about it and, you know, who's passionate about the album or the band or whatever. It's pretty cool.
That makes me very happy to hear.
Yeah. That's why I was like, I got to do an episode. I'm ready. Let's go.
What song do you want to use to go out on?
Oh, gosh. I wasn't prepared for this one.
I don't always ask it.
I almost chose I Will Always as a favorite. So maybe that should be the choice because I think it's so beautiful and sort of it sits in the same place for me as like a top tier song from the album as I Still Do. But it's like, it's funny because it's almost at the end. So it's like the very beginning of the album and almost the very end of the album. But it was another one that I struggled. I was like juggling between which of those two to choose as my favorite. So
yeah, well, good. That works. We'll use that. You get the full gamut of emotions. And if we're talking about towards the end of the album, I'd like to touch on the very last song.
Yeah.
Put Me Down. I almost chose that as my underrated because I just have like so little recollection of it because as a kid, like I said, I only listened to this so often. It's the last song, so maybe sometimes I didn't like get there because I was getting ready or whatever and just didn't finish the cassette.
And it's a little quieter.
It's quieter, but in terms of what you're talking about with her yodeling or whatever, like her just making noises with her mouth. What she does in this, I know that the fuckers that made Frozen 2 heard this song and went, oh, let's put this in Frozen 2. We'll just do this, but not as good.
Right?
Sounds
That's true.
really
I never
similar.
played that connection, but that now I'm going to always hear that a little differently.
It sounds really, really similar to me. Obviously, the original is significantly better, and just a huge opportunity to like just get really big. They just get so big at the end there. It's like a perfect outro song.
Yeah.
Like you said, like the opening and then the outro, they just work so well. Like I've been in bands, so I know that there are times that you construct a song, you're like, yeah, this is a fucking show closer.
Yep.
This is one that, you know, if you're going to make an album, this would be one. And they chose correctly because that song just really just, I don't know, it's magical. Yeah.
Yes. It's a little bit on the quieter side, but you're right. It does build to some of her like vocal stylings really being highlighted. And I was thinking about it as you were saying about the intro and the out song on this album. It's one where like I'll have it on Spotify or something like while I'm working, and I'll realize I've listened to it like 3 times all the way through. Because it's sort of just the outro sort of segues back into the beginning, and I'll be like, all right, maybe I need to change it up. I don't want to get sick of it, but it does flow really, really well.
Certainly not an accident. You know, back in that time when CDs were becoming the thing, that would typically be how CD players would work. They just start back over.
Right.
And so bands did kind of get more into doing stuff like that very consciously. But again, given the fucking evenness of the album, like we were saying before, that maybe it's just a happy accident. Who knows?
Yeah, I was surprised too, and I was like, holy crap, this album's only 41 minutes long. because I feel like it's such a journey and like goes so many different places, and it's kind of immersive with some of the tonality and the, certainly her singing. I'll never feel like I've only spent 41 minutes with it. Like it feels longer in a good way.
In a good way, yeah. And to me, 40 minutes is about the perfect length for an album. Like you get much shorter and it's like it's done before you're doing what you're trying to do. And if you're like getting ready or making dinner or something like that, and it's much longer, you start to be like, okay, I'm ready for a new feeling.
Right. Is this over yet?
Right. Kind of depends on the album. But yeah, this is, again, it's just a really masterfully made and produced album. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on about it before we move on?
Oh gosh. Like I said, it's one of those albums for me that it's funny how it pops back up in my life. Those to me are like the classics of, your life, sort of. It's like wherever I'm at, maybe I find a new, deeper or different way to connect with this art. And I think it's just a timeless piece. Listening to it even today, I feel like it could have come out now. And like it would still work, it would still fit.
Or if it came out in the early 80s, like you wouldn't be surprised either, right?
Yeah, it's funny when you're talking about The Cure and the Smiths and things like that. I was listening to The Cure while I was driving yesterday. I was like, you know what? Some of the the melodies and the sounds here are similar. Like the mood of it all.
Totally.
I feel like that must have been an influence for them.
I would think, yeah.
So it could be 1993. It could have come out in 2023, but it's still brilliant. So
that says a lot right there. A timeless album.
Yes. Yeah. Yep, exactly.
So at the end of these episodes, I always kind of shift gears a little bit and ask some other questions. So I have some questions for you. It's actually, I've got a little bit of a game for you.
Ooh, fun.
It should be an easy game. So I am going to give you the top 5 Billboard singles of the week of March 1st when this album came out in 1993. So none of these songs are on it because it didn't immediately start charting. I'm going to give you the 5 songs that were the hit singles. And
oh boy.
I'd like you to tell me one, if you have any memories or whatever you want to tell me about them. And then also just try and tell me the order that you think that they go in.
All right. Goodness. Okay. All right. I'm ready.
All right. In no particular order, we have Duran Duran's Ordinary World. You remember that song?
I do remember that song. And I remember being really confused about what the lyrics were when I heard it on the radio.
And we also have from the Bodyguard soundtrack, which was really big at that time, we have Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You.
Oh, boy.
Talk about ubiquity. I mean, that
I know. It's like, talk about overplayed.
Nothing But a G Thing by Dr. Dre was a huge hit. And then similarly, sort of, I don't know, Dr. Dre was like real rap, hip hop. And then you also had Snow and the song Informer at the same time. Remember that pile of turds?
I really do, yes.
People loved it. And then number 1, shit, I just gave you the number 1.
I didn't hear that. You're good.
All right, I guess you gotta figure out the other 4. Number 1 was A Whole New World from the Aladdin soundtrack, which would have been fun for you to try to figure out where that placed, but I blew it.
Oh, man.
So again, real quickly, Snow's Informer, Duran Duran's Ordinary World, Dr. Dre's Nothing But a G Thing, and Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You.
All right, so with Aladdin being number 1, I feel like it has to be Whitney number 2.
That is correct.
Because that song would never, ever, ever go away as much as we may have wanted it to. It was everywhere.
Yeah.
Trying to think about the era here. So 1993. This is a little muddier now. I'm gonna guess Informer.
Close. That was number 4.
So maybe then, is it Duran Duran in 3rd?
Yes. Duran Duran is number 3.
Okay. And then Informer number 4 and Dr. Dre number 5. Because I feel like Dr. Dre wasn't huge yet.
He got huge, but that song was the song that made him huge, but it wasn't like an immediate, like, overnight thing.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know what I mean? It was like, kind of grew, right? And by the time he was like, well, I can't say anything about Dr. Dre. What the fuck do I know about Dr. Dre?
But it's really funny, like, that was what it was for that week, because I'm like, circa 1993, I was 11. Like, right. I was a big Disney fan, so I was like, oh yeah, Aladdin, A Whole New World. Of course that was number 1. It was number 1 to me.
You helped push it to the top of the charts.
Right? I was obsessed with that movie and the music, so that makes sense.
That's great.
That's funny.
Awesome. Well, Kate, I really appreciate you coming on the show. It's been fun talking to you. I hope you come back.
Yeah, you too. Awesome. Thank you so much, Travis.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I truly appreciate Kate coming on to the show. She did what I am always hoping that people will do, that they'll hear an episode and respond to my call at the end of the episode where I'm like, hey strangers, do you want to come on my podcast and talk about an album that you love? The offer's always there. All you gotta do is email me at 9394podcast@gmail.com. You can talk about any album you want to from the era, such as Sonic Youth's experimental Jet Set Trash and No Star. Remember this song, Bowl in the Heather? This album came out in 94. We could talk about it or any other album that you want from the era. I'm not picky. I just like new guests. And I like old guests too. And I also like it when people pretty please rate and review the show. I do put a fair amount of effort into this, to be honest, and it totally bums me out that some of the most recent reviews I've gotten have been 1-star reviews on Apple. It bums me out, what can I say? But you don't have to stand for that. You can go on Apple or any other podcatcher and just rate and review the show if you don't mind. I appreciate it. Anything else? I think that's about it. Yeah. I'll leave it there. Have a good one. '93-'94, a music podcast with Travis Roy, is a labor of love. It is not and never will be monetized. Please don't sue.